The heavy velvet curtains of the penthouse suite at the Grand Pierre did little to block out the shimmering neon heartbeat of New York City. Inside, the air was still thick with the scent of expensive cologne and a lingering heat of a passion neither had expected. Naomi Rivers stirred under the silk sheets, her dark mahogany skin glowing softly in the dim morning light. She felt a weightlessness she hadn't known in years. For one night, she wasn't the hard-working student struggling to pay for med school. She was just a woman captivated by a man whose eyes held the depth of the Atlantic. A sharp, persistent vibration broke the silence. Next to her, Dominic Thorne, fair-skinned with sharp, aristocratic features and hair the color of midnight, bolted upright. He reached for his phone on the nightstand. His face, which had been softened by sleep and Naomi's touch just an hour before, instantly hardened into a mask of duty. "I told you not to call unless it was an emergency," Dominic whispered harshly into the receiver. He listened for a moment, his jaw tightening. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Clear the private wing." He hung up and glanced at the sleeping woman beside him. He reached out, his pale fingers hovering just an inch from Naomi's shoulder, wanting to wake her, wanting to ask for her number, wanting to explain that his father had just collapsed. But the urgency of the Thorne bloodline was a tether that always pulled too hard. He dressed in frantic silence, throwing on his charcoal suit. In his haste, he grabbed his watch and keys, but as he leaned over to snatch his jacket, the gold chain around his neck snapped against the edge of the nightstand. The heavy, crested pendant, the seal of the Thorne family, slid onto the white duvet, unnoticed in his rush. With one last lingering look at the curve of Naomi's back and the dark silk of her hair against the pillow, Dominic vanished through the heavy mahogany doors. An hour later, the sun finally clawed its way over the Manhattan skyline. Naomi stretched, reaching out one hand to find only cold, empty space. She sat up, the sheets pooling around her waist. "Hello?" she called out, her voice raspy. The silence of the suite was her only answer. A familiar sting of reality pricked at her chest. She had known this was a chance encounter, but something about the way he had looked at her made her think it was more. As she prepared to climb out of bed, something cold brushed against her thigh. She pulled back the covers and found it. It was a heavy 24-karat gold pendant. In the center was an embossed eagle holding a sapphire, a crest that looked like it belonged in a museum, not a hotel room. She picked it up, the metal warm from the sun. It felt heavy, significant. "You forgot this," she whispered to the empty room. She held it to her chest, the gold standing out in sharp, beautiful contrast against her dark skin. To her, it wasn't a symbol of a billion-dollar empire. It was a promise, a token. She didn't know his name or his title, but she knew his touch. She placed the chain around her neck, letting the sapphire rest right above her heart. "I'll keep it safe," she promised herself, "until you come back for it." But as Naomi gathered her things and slipped out of the hotel, she didn't see the black SUV parked across the street. She didn't see the man in the driver's seat snapping a photo of her face, and she certainly didn't know that miles away, in a cold, marble-floored mansion, Eleanor Thorne was already looking at that very photo with a look of pure, calculated disdain. The Thorne estate in Upper East Side was a fortress of cold marble and silence, a place where secrets were buried under layers of antique rugs and family legacy. Eleanor Thorne sat in her glass-walled study, her light porcelain skin looking almost translucent in the morning glare. She did not look like a woman who had just heard her husband was in the hospital. She looked like a general preparing for war. On the mahogany desk before her lay a high-resolution photograph. It was Naomi, captured the moment she stepped out of the Grand Pierre. The contrast was jarring. The girl's deep mahogany skin was radiant even in the grainy surveillance shot, her eyes wide with a mix of wonder and the lingering glow of the night before. But what caught Eleanor's eye wasn't the girl's beauty, it was the glimmer of gold resting against her collarbone. "She has the seal," Eleanor whispered, her voice like cracking ice. She found it on the bed after Mr. Dominic departed in haste, ma'am, the man standing in the shadows replied. He was the family's fixer, a man paid to see things the world wasn't meant to see. Eleanor felt a surge of aristocratic fury. That pendant was more than jewelry. It was a key to the Thorne vaults, a symbol of a bloodline that stretched back to the founding of the city. To see it on the neck of a stranger, a common girl from a world they didn't inhabit, was an insult she could not tolerate. "Monitor her," Eleanor commanded, her pale eyes narrowing. "Every move, every meal, every person she speaks to. If she attempts to contact my son, intercept it. Dominic is currently distracted by his father's recovery. He must never know he left a trail." 2 months passed. For Naomi, those 8 weeks were a blur of nausea and rising panic. She was in her final rotations of medical school, her days spent in the sterile white halls of the clinic, and her nights spent clutching the gold pendant, praying for the man with the midnight hair to reappear. But he never did. The hotel had no record of a Dominic in that room. It had been booked under a corporate shell company. The morning she collapsed in the hospital break room was the morning her life split in 2. "Naomi, honey, talk to me," her friend and fellow student, Sarah, whispered, holding a cool cloth to Naomi's dark forehead. Naomi sat up, her head spinning. The scent of the hospital cafeteria's coffee, which she usually loved, made her stomach turn violently. She knew. Even before the blood test came back, she knew. "I'm pregnant, Sarah," Naomi whispered, her voice trembling, "and I don't even know his last name." She didn't know that the janitor, mopping the floor in the hallway, was listening. She didn't know that within 20 minutes a coded message had reached the Thorne estate. The confrontation happened 3 days later. Naomi was walking home to her small apartment when a black sedan pulled up alongside her. The back door opened, and Eleanor Thorne stepped out. She was draped in taupe silk, her light hair perfectly coiffed, looking like an angel of death. "Miss Rivers," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "we need to discuss the complication growing inside you." Naomi froze, her hand instinctively flying to the pendant beneath her shirt. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" "I am the woman who ensures the Thorne name remains untainted," Eleanor replied, stepping closer. The height difference was small, but Eleanor's presence was suffocating. "My son is a man of great destiny. You are a girl of great ambition. I am here to offer you a choice, one that will save your life and the lives of those children." "Children?" Naomi gasped. "Twins," Eleanor said with a cruel smile. "The Thorne blood is strong, even when it is misplaced. Here is a check for $5 million. It is enough to finish your studies, move your sister abroad, and live a life of luxury anywhere that isn't New York. If you stay, if you speak to Dominic, I will ensure you are stripped of your medical license before you even earn it. You will be a mother with nothing, hunted by a family that owns the ground you walk on." Naomi looked at the check. It was a life-changing sum. Then she looked at the cold, pale woman before her. She realized then that she wasn't being offered a gift, she was being offered an exile. "He's looking for me, isn't he?" Naomi asked, her voice gaining a sudden sharp edge of defiance. Eleanor's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. "He is a Thorne. He does what he is told, and right now he is told you don't exist." That night, Naomi packed her bags. She took the pendant, the check, and her broken heart. She called her sister in London. She wouldn't be a victim. She would take the Thorne money and turn it into a weapon. She would become the best doctor the world had ever seen, and she would raise her sons to be kings in their own right. As the plane lifted off from JFK, Naomi looked down at the city lights. Somewhere in those towering glass buildings, Dominic Thorne was likely sitting in a boardroom, unaware that the woman he had searched for was finally back. She wasn't just a doctor anymore. She was a mother on a mission, and if the Thornes wanted her skills, they would have to accept her truth. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of a luxury flat in Hampton, casting a warm glow over the breakfast table. Dr. Naomi Rivers sat with a tablet in one hand and a cup of black coffee in the other. Her skin, deep and radiant mahogany, was set off by the crisp white of her silk blouse. She was no longer the trembling student who had fled New York in the middle of the night. She was now one of the most sought-after cardiothoracic surgeons in Europe. "Mom, Miles took my stethoscope." "Didn't I? I'm just checking Mason's heart rate because he's being slow." Naomi looked up and felt that familiar, breathtaking squeeze in her chest. Standing in the hallway were two 6-year-old boys. They were identical in every way. The same light olive complexion, the same sharp aristocratic nose, and the midnight black curls that refused to stay flat. To any stranger, they were beautiful children. To Naomi, they were living, breathing ghosts of a man she had spent 2,000 nights trying to forget. "Miles, give your brother back his toy. Mason, finish your toast," Naomi said, her voice firm but filled with a melody of love. The boys scrambled to obey. They were brilliant, precocious, and possessed a quiet confidence that Naomi knew didn't come from her side of the family. Every time they looked at her with those piercing, deep-set eyes, she saw Dominic Thorne staring back at her. For 6 years, she had lived in a gilded exile. She had used Eleanor Thorne's silence money to put herself through the most rigorous surgical fellowships in London. She had worked twice as hard as anyone else, driven by the memory of a woman who thought she could buy Naomi's dignity. A chime on her tablet interrupted her thoughts. It was an urgent, encrypted email from the chief of surgery at New York Presbyterian. "Dr. Rivers, we have a critical case, a high-profile patient with a complex aortic dissection. You are the only specialist with a 100% success rate on this specific procedure. The family has requested the best in the world. Cost is no object. Please, come home." Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. Home. She had sworn she wouldn't return until she was untouchable. She reached up, her fingers grazing the gold pendant hidden beneath her blouse. She still wore it every day. It had become her talisman, a reminder of where she came from and what her sons were owed. "Is everything okay, Naomi?" her sister Maya asked, walking into the room. Maya had moved to London with her 6 years ago and had been the anchor that allowed Naomi to survive residency as a single mother. "They want me in New York," Naomi said, her voice barely a whisper. "The Thornes?" Maya's eyes widened. "The email doesn't say a name, just high profile, but the hospital is the one they fund." Naomi stood up, her eyes flashing with a mix of fear and a new, cold determination. "I've spent 6 years hiding, Maya. My sons are starting to ask why they don't have a father. They deserve to know the ground they walk on, and I'm no longer the girl Eleanor Thorne can scare away." "You're going back," Maya stated, not asking. "I'm going back," Naomi confirmed. "But this time, I'm not arriving as a mistake in a hotel room. I'm arriving as the only person who can save their lives." 3 days later, the wheels of a private jet touched down at JFK. Naomi stepped onto the tarmac, her heels clicking against the pavement. She wore an oversized trench coat, her dark skin glowing against the New York humidity. Flanking her were Miles and Mason, dressed in matching navy blazers, looking like 2 little princes returning to a kingdom they didn't know they owned. As the black car drove them toward Manhattan, Naomi looked at the skyline. Somewhere in those towering glass buildings, Dominic Thorne was likely sitting in a boardroom, unaware that the woman he had searched for was finally back. She wasn't just a doctor anymore. She was a mother on a mission. And if the Thornes wanted her skills, they would have to accept her truth. "Welcome to New York, boys," she whispered, squeezing their hands. "Try not to break too many hearts." Dominic Thorne stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office on the 80th floor, staring out at the city he supposedly ruled. To the public, he was the ice king of Wall Street, the richest man in New York, a ruthless strategist who had tripled the Thorne family fortune in half a decade. But inside, he felt like a hollow shell,
a man living in a perpetual winter. His mother Eleanor entered without knocking. She was as impeccable as ever, her light skin powdered to perfection, her eyes scanning his office for any sign of weakness. "The board is waiting, Dominic, and so is Juliana. Her father has already agreed to the merger terms. All that is left is the engagement announcement." Dominic didn't turn around. "I'm not marrying Juliana, Mother. I'm not marrying anyone." "It has been 6 years," Eleanor snapped, her composure finally fraying. "6 years since that tawdry night at the hotel. You've turned down every heiress in the country for a ghost, a woman who probably doesn't even remember your name." Dominic turned then, his eyes burning with a cold fire that made even Eleanor flinch. "I remember her. I remember the way she looked in the moonlight, and I remember the way I felt when I woke up and realized I'd lost her. My life hasn't been the same since that morning, and it won't until I find her." "You've had the best investigators in the world looking," Eleanor lied smoothly, her heart thumping against her ribs. "If she wanted to be found, she would have surfaced. She took what she wanted and left. Let it go." Dominic looked back at the window. He didn't tell his mother that he still went to that hotel once a month. He didn't tell her that he had a private vault containing the only thing he had left of that night, a single strand of dark hair he'd found on the pillowcase he'd bought from the maid. "My father is dying, isn't he?" Dominic asked, shifting the subject. Eleanor's face softened into a rare display of genuine concern. "The aortic dissection is worsening. The local surgeons are too afraid to cut. They say his heart is too weak for the bypass." "I've already handled it," Dominic said, his voice returning to its professional clip. "I've pulled strings at the State Department. I've flown in the world's leading specialist from London, a Dr. Rivers. She lands today." Eleanor froze. The name hit her like a physical blow. Rivers. It was a common enough name, but the coincidence felt like a cold hand tightening around her throat. "Rivers," Eleanor managed, her voice tight. "Who is he?" "She," Dominic corrected, picking up his suit jacket. "A brilliant surgeon, young, revolutionary, and apparently she doesn't take no for an answer. She'll be at the hospital within an hour. I'm going to meet her." "I'll go with you," Eleanor insisted, her mind racing. It couldn't be her. That girl was a student, a nobody. $5 million was enough to disappear, not to become a world-class surgeon. New York Presbyterian Hospital. Naomi walked through the sliding glass doors of the VIP wing, her heart drumming a rhythm of war. She wore her white lab coat over a tailored charcoal dress, the gold pendant hidden securely beneath her scrubs. Behind her, Maya held the hands of the twins. "Stay in the lounge with Auntie Maya," she whispered to Miles and Mason. "I have to go save a life. I'll be back in a few hours." "Save the king, Mommy," Mason chirped, his voice echoing in the sterile hallway. Naomi smiled, kissed their foreheads, and turned toward the surgical briefing room. She was halfway down the hall when the elevator doors at the end of the corridor opened. A group of men in suits stepped out, led by a man whose presence seemed to pull all the oxygen out of the room. Dominic Thorne. He looked exactly the same, yet older. His features were sharper, his aura more commanding. He was talking to a doctor, his brow furrowed with concentration. He didn't look up. But behind him, Eleanor did. Their eyes met across the busy hallway. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She stood tall, her dark skin a striking, defiant contrast against the white walls and the pale, horrified face of the woman who had tried to buy her soul. Eleanor's hand went to her mouth, her eyes darting nervously toward the nurse's station. "Dominic," Eleanor suddenly gasped, grabbing his arm and stumbling slightly. I feel faint. The stress. Please, take me to the waiting room." Dominic caught his mother, his attention diverted. "Mother? Someone get a chair." Naomi took the opportunity. She turned a corner and disappeared into the scrub room, her breath hitching. She had seen him. He was right there. "Not yet," she whispered to her reflection in the glass. "First, I save his father. Then I take my throne." The surgical theater was a cathedral of high-tech machinery and hushed voices. Dr. Naomi Rivers stood at the center of it all, her dark eyes focused behind her surgical mask. The patient on the table was Harrison Thorne, the Royal Highness of New York's business world. To the world, he was a titan of industry. To Naomi, he was the grandfather of her children, a man whose heart was literally tearing apart. "Scalpel," Naomi said steadily, her voice melodic. The surgery was grueling. An aortic dissection of this magnitude required a steady hand and a lack of fear, two things Naomi had cultivated over 6 years of struggle. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice the man's features. Even under the surgical drapes, Harrison had the same regal bone structure as Dominic, the same defiant chin. Outside, in the observation gallery, Dominic Thorne stood pressed against the glass. He couldn't see the lead surgeon's face clearly under the cap and mask, but he was mesmerized by her movements. She moved with a grace that was almost lyrical, her dark hands moving with terrifying precision against the pale, open chest of his father. "She's incredible," Dominic whispered, his voice thick with uncharacteristic emotion. Eleanor sat in the corner of the gallery, her face a mask of frozen terror. She wasn't watching the surgery. She was watching the door. She knew that somewhere in this hospital there were 2 children who could dismantle her life with a single glance. She had to get Naomi out of the city the moment the surgery was over. "Vitals are stabilizing," Naomi announced 4 hours later. She stepped back, her scrub suit damped with sweat. She had just saved the life of the man who represented the family that had discarded her. She splashed cold water on her face, letting the mahogany of her skin catch the light in the mirror. She reached under her scrubs and pulled out the pendant. She let it hang outside her shirt for a moment, the gold eagle catching the fluorescent light. "I did it, boys," she whispered. She walked out into the private VIP corridor, intending to find Maya and the twins. But as she rounded the corner near the recovery wing, she came to a dead stop. Dominic was standing there, leaning against the wall, his head in his hands. He heard her footsteps and looked up. The world seemed to tilt. For Dominic, the sterile hospital hallway vanished. He was back in the Grand Pierre. He saw the same eyes that had haunted his dreams, the same radiant, dark complexion that he had spent 6 years trying to find in every crowd. "You," he breathed, his voice breaking. Naomi stood her ground. She didn't hide the pendant. It sat squarely in the center of her chest, a golden beacon of the truth. "Hello, Dominic." I've looked everywhere," he said, taking a step toward her, his eyes searching hers with a desperate intensity. "I never stopped looking. Why did you leave? Why did you disappear?" Naomi's expression remained professional, though her heart was screaming. "I didn't leave because I wanted to, Dominic. I left because I was given a choice between my future and my destruction, and I chose to be the woman who could save your father today." Before Dominic could process her words, a high-pitched voice echoed down the hallway. "Mommy, is the Grandpa King okay?" Dominic froze. He turned his head slowly toward the sound. Walking toward them, hand in hand with Maya, were Miles and Mason. They weren't just children, they were mirrors. They had Dominic's exact brow, his exact midnight curls, and the same light olive skin that defined the Thorne men. Dominic looked from the boys to Naomi, his breath hitching in his chest. "Naomi," he whispered, his eyes wide with a sudden, overwhelming realization. "Who are they?" Naomi stepped forward, pulling the boys into her side. She looked Dominic straight in the eye, her voice clear and unwavering. "Dominic, meet Miles and Mason. They're the reason I kept your pendant." The air in the VIP corridor was so thick with tension, it felt like a physical weight. Dominic stood paralyzed, his gaze darting between the 2 boys and Naomi. He felt a strange electric pull in his chest, a biological recognition he couldn't explain. Miles, the bolder of the 2, stepped forward and looked up at the tall man in the expensive suit. "You look like the man in Mommy's drawing," Miles said, his voice small but curious. Dominic's heart hammered against his ribs. He dropped to one knee, his expensive wool trousers hitting the sterile linoleum without a thought. He was eye level with the boy. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. The shape of the jaw, the slight curve of the ears, it was like looking into a time machine at his own reflection. "Dominic!" Eleanor's voice cut through the moment like a serrated blade. She hurried down the hall, her face pale and drawn. She stopped short when she saw the tableau, her son on his knees before the complications she had tried to bury 6 years ago. "This is a hospital, not a playground," she hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward the nurse's station. "Dominic, get up. Dr. Rivers has work to do, and we have a recovery to monitor." Dominic stood slowly, his eyes never leaving Naomi's. "Mother, look at them. Look at their faces." "I see 2 children, Dominic, nothing more," Eleanor lied, her voice trembling with the effort to remain composed. "They are my sons, Eleanor," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low register. It was the first time he hadn't called her mother. "And you knew, didn't you?" Before the confrontation could escalate, a medical monitor began to beep rhythmically from the recovery suite. A nurse stepped out, looking relieved. "The patient is awake. Mr. Thorne is asking for his son." Naomi stepped into her professional role like a suit of armor. "He shouldn't be speaking yet, but he is stable. One at a time. Dominic, go in, but keep it brief." Dominic lingered for a second, his hand reaching out as if to touch Naomi's arm, but he pulled back, turning instead into his father's room. Inside, Harrison Thorne looked smaller than he had on the operating table. His light skin was sallow, but his eyes, the same eyes the twins carried, were sharp and clear. He gripped Dominic's hand with surprising strength. "The doctor," he wheezed, the oxygen mask hissing. "She's the one they call the Queen of Hearts in London." "She saved you, Dad," Dominic whispered, pulling a chair to the bedside. "I saw them, Dominic," Harrison said, his voice gaining strength, "through the glass before I went under. 2 boys. They were wearing our face." He coughed, a dry rattling sound. "I'm an old man who almost met my maker today. I have all the money in the world and no legacy but a son who won't marry. I told you I wanted a grandchild before I died. It seems God gave me 2 while I wasn't looking." Dominic felt a lump form in his throat. "Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "Then find out," Harrison commanded, his eyes drifting toward the door where Naomi was silhouetted in the glass. "That woman," Harrison said, "she didn't just save my heart. She's carrying the future of this family. I don't care about mergers or Juliana. I want my family under one roof. Get married, Dominic. Bring those boys home. That is my final decree." Dominic walked out of the room 10 minutes later to find the hallway empty. Naomi and the twins were gone. Only his mother remained, pacing the floor like a caged animal. "Where are they?" Dominic demanded. "I had security escort them to the hotel," Eleanor said, trying to regain her footing. "Dominic, listen to reason. You don't know where she's been. You don't know if those children are truly yours." "Enough," Dominic shouted, the sound echoing through the quiet wing. He pulled the gold pendant, his family's seal, from his pocket. He had found it on the nightstand after Naomi left the OR. She had left it there as a message. "You paid her to leave, Mother," Dominic said cold and flat. "I saw the bank records from 6 years ago. I found the trace this morning when I started digging. You used our legacy to buy her silence." He leaned in close, his fair face inches from hers. "You wanted a royal Thorne family? Well, you're going to get one, but you're going to have to answer to the queen I'm bringing home." Dominic turned on his heel and ran toward the elevators. He had 6 years of lost time to make up for, and he wasn't going to let another second slip away. Dominic didn't go to his office, and he didn't go to the mansion. He drove straight to the Grand Pierre, the same hotel where their story had begun and ended 6 years ago. His heart was a chaotic drumbeat against his ribs. He knew Naomi wouldn't stay in a hospital-provided dorm. She was a woman of means now, and she was a woman of sentiment. He found the suite number under the name Rivers. When he reached the door, he paused, his hand hovering over the wood. For 6 years, he had rehearsed this moment, but now that it was here, he felt like a boy again, stripped of his billionaire status and his royal name. He knocked. The door opened to reveal Maya, who looked at him with a mixture of recognition and fierce protection. "He's here!" she called out over her shoulder. "Let him in, Maya." Naomi's voice drifted from the living area. Dominic stepped inside. The suite was filled with the sounds of a cartoon playing on a tablet and the scent of expensive room service. Naomi was standing by the window, her silhouette dark and regal against the New York skyline. She had changed into a simple black dress, the gold pendant resting once more against the deep mahogany of her dark skin. "They're asleep," Naomi said, gesturing to the closed bedroom door. "It's been a long day for them. Saving a grandfather they didn't know they had is exhausting work." "Naomi," Dominic started, his voice cracking. "I didn't know. My mother, she told me you were gone, that you didn't want to be found. I spent millions on investigators, but she must have been intercepting the reports." Naomi turned, her eyes glittering with unshed tears. "She didn't just tell me to leave, Dominic. She told me she would destroy my career. She told me my children, our children, would be hunted. I took the money because it was the only way to build a fortress around them. I didn't do it for the luxury. I did it so I could stand in front of you today as an equal, not a victim." Dominic moved toward her, stopping only when he was a foot away. The contrast between them was as striking as it had been that first night, his pale, strained face against her calm, dark beauty. "You are more than my equal," he whispered. "You're the woman who saved my father's life when no one else could. You're the mother of my sons. I've refused every woman my parents pushed on me because my heart was stuck in this hotel room 6 years ago." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It wasn't the pendant. It was a ring, set with a sapphire that matched the stone in the thorn seal. "My father woke up today and told me his only wish was to see his family under one roof. But I'm not asking because of his decree. I'm asking because I've been half a man for 6 years. I want to be a father to Miles and Mason, and I want to be the man who deserves to stand beside you." Naomi looked at the ring, then back at his face. The anger she had carried for so long began to melt, replaced by the realization that Dominic had been just as much a prisoner of his mother's games as she had been. "It won't be easy," she cautioned, her voice low. "Your mother will never truly accept me. The world will look at us and see a scandal." "Let them look," Dominic said, his hand finally finding hers. The warmth of her dark skin against his palm felt like home. "Let them see the richest man in New York kneeling before his queen. I don't care about the scandal. I care about the 6 years we lost." A small creak came from the bedroom door. 2 heads poked out, 4 eyes wide with curiosity. "Is the man staying for dinner?" Mason whispered. Dominic looked at the boys, a bright, genuine smile breaking across his face for the first time in years. "If your mother says yes, I'm staying forever." Naomi looked at her sons, then at the man holding her hand. She felt the weight of the pendant around her neck, no longer a token of a lost night, but a bridge to a new life. "Get the menus, boys," Naomi said softly, her eyes never leaving Dominic's. "Your father is staying." The following morning, the Thorne mansion felt less like a palace and more like a courtroom. Harrison Thorne had insisted on being discharged early, a feat only possible because of the private medical wing and the round-the-clock nursing staff Naomi had vetted. He sat in a motorized wheelchair in the grand library, his face pale but his eyes fixed with a newfound steel. Dominic stood by the fireplace, his hand resting firmly on Naomi's shoulder. She looked every bit the doctor and the dignitary, her dark skin luminous against a cream-colored suit. In the foyer, Miles and Mason were being entertained by Maya, their laughter echoing through the halls of a house that had forgotten the sound of joy. Eleanor Thorne entered the room like a ghost, draped in gray silk. She saw the group and tightened her grip on her pearl necklace. "Harrison, you should be resting. Dominic, why is this woman still in our home?" "She isn't this woman, Eleanor," Harrison rasped, with his voice vibrating with authority. "She is Dr. Naomi Rivers. She is the mother of the Thorne heirs, and she is the woman you tried to erase." Eleanor gave a cold, dismissive laugh. "I did what was necessary for the brand, Harrison. She was a distraction, a girl who took a payoff and ran at the first sign of trouble." "I didn't run, Eleanor." Naomi stepped forward, her voice calm and clinical. I invested. I took your bribe and I bought the best education in the world. I took your attempt to bury me and used it to build a life where I would never have to bow to you again." Dominic stepped towards his mother, throwing a thick folder onto the library table. "I spent the night going through the offshore accounts, Mother. I found the discretionary fund you used to pay the private investigators to stalk Naomi in London. I found the emails where you threatened the New York Medical Board to flag her name if she ever applied for a license here." Eleanor's face finally cracked, the porcelain masks shattering. "I did it for you, Dominic, to keep you focused, to ensure you married a woman of your own status." "My status?" Dominic roared, the sound making the crystals on the chandelier tremble. "You robbed me of 6 years of my sons' lives. You let my father believe he had no legacy. You traded my happiness for a merger with a family that doesn't even like us." "Enough," Harrison commanded. The room went silent. The old man looked at his wife with a profound, weary sadness. "Eleanor, you have always valued the Thorne name more than the people who carry it. Because of your necessity, I almost died without knowing my grandsons. Because of your pride, my son has lived in a winter of your making." Harrison looked at Naomi, then back at Eleanor. "You will retire to the estate in Connecticut. You will have no further say in the family business, and you will not step foot in this house unless Naomi invites you, which, frankly, I wouldn't blame her if she never did." Eleanor stood frozen, the realization of her exile sinking in. She looked at Naomi, hoping to see a glimmer of smugness, but she found only pity. That was the ultimate insult. "The boys are waiting to meet their grandfather properly," Naomi said softly, breaking the tension. Eleanor turned and walked out of the library, her heels clicking a lonely rhythm on the marble floor. She was gone, a shadow finally retreating from the sun. Dominic turned to Naomi, pulling her into his arms. The weight that had sat on his chest for 6 years was gone. "It's over," he whispered. "No," Naomi replied, looking toward the door as Miles and Mason came running in, their dark curls bouncing as they raced towards Harrison's wheelchair. "It's just beginning." Harrison laughed, a deep, booming sound that filled the room as the twins climbed onto his lap. For the first time in its history, the Thorne mansion felt like a home. The sprawling gardens of the Thorne estate had been transformed into a vision of light and color. Thousands of white hydrangeas and deep purple orchids, the exact shade of the sapphire in the Thorne seal, decorated the lawn. It was the social event of the decade. But for the first time in the history of New York high society, it wasn't a cold business merger, it was a celebration of a family found. Dominic Thorne stood on the grand terrace, looking out at the crowd. He wore a tuxedo that fit his lean frame perfectly, his fair features glowing with a happiness that made him look years younger. Beside him stood Dr. Naomi Rivers. She was breathtaking in a gown of shimmering gold silk that draped elegantly over her dark mahogany skin. Around her neck, the royal pendant hung prominently, but it was now joined by a stunning engagement ring that caught the afternoon sun. "You're thinking about that morning in the hotel, aren't you?" Naomi whispered, leaning into him. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am that you didn't throw that pendant in the trash. I'm thinking about how the strange woman from the hotel turned out to be the smartest, bravest person I've ever met." The music shifted to a regal fanfare as Harrison Thorne made his way onto the terrace. He moved with the aid of a cane now, his strength returned thanks to Naomi's meticulous post-operative care. He stood before the microphone, waving a hand to silence the crowd of New York's elite. "Friends, colleagues, and family, today is not just about the recovery of my health. It is about the restoration of the Thorne heart. For years, we focused on building walls and bank accounts, but today, we celebrate the arrival of the next generation." He gestured to the side, and Miles and Mason ran out onto the terrace. They were dressed in miniature versions of Dominic's tuxedo, their midnight curls styled and their olive skin radiant. They didn't look like hidden children anymore. They looked like the heirs to an empire. "Meet my grandsons, Miles and Mason Thorne." The applause was deafening. In the back of the crowd, Eleanor Thorne was notably absent, having remained in her quiet exile in Connecticut. The air felt lighter without her shadow. As the party moved into the evening, the twins were the stars of the show, charmed by the attention, but never leaving their mother's side for too long. Dominic led Naomi to the center of the dance floor. "My father requested a grandchild," Dominic murmured as they swayed to the music. "I think we over-delivered." "We gave him his life back," Naomi replied, her dark eyes locked onto his. "And we gave the boys the father they deserved. That's the real joy." The celebration continued late into the night. It was a story that would be whispered about in New York for generations. The doctor who came from across the ocean to save a king, only to discover she had been carrying the crown all along. As the fireworks began to burst over the Hudson River, illuminating the dark sky in flashes of gold and blue, Naomi leaned her head on Dominic's shoulder. The pendant felt warm against her skin, no longer a heavy secret, but a light for the future. They weren't just the richest family in town, they were finally a whole one.